In my last video, I was talking about state standards for world languages and how it's difficult to key your lessons to certain grade levels when the state standards are not specified by grade level because we don't know at what age or grade level a student started learning the language. So there's no such thing as necessarily 9th grade standards or 10th grade standards for a world language. So I asked at the end of the video, what do we do if the books are not necessarily chosen based on what that state standard says for grade level, but is rather just kind of a beginning book or an intermediate book for the language in a middle school or high school language class. And so one thing that I would suggest in that case is if you really feel like the students are struggling to implement the grammar that they're learning and they're not really developing the proficiency that you want for them to be able to understand what you're saying in class in the language, to be able to start doing more of the class in the language, having them turn to each other and talk without them saying they're totally lost or just trying to negotiate the situation in English rather than in the language they're learning, is to think about it in terms of levels of control. There are 3 levels of control for new things that they're learning. Generally, we talk about this in terms of grammar, but it could also be in terms of vocabulary, topics, themes, or even intercultural competence, how easy it is for them to navigate a cross-cultural communication situation. So in terms of grammar and the levels of control, we generally talk about conceptual, partial, and full control. And those are the levels because when you talk about mastery, sometimes that's the term that the school system requires is to teach for mastery, but sometimes it's hard to know what that looks like in terms of a language feature. Is it that they are 100% correct in the grammar? Is it that they have reached a certain threshold, like 85% or however your district defines mastery? Or is it that they're able to accomplish that function 100% or 85% of the time? And really, if you're looking at your state standards and they talk about proficiency and what a student is able to do in the language. Are they able to order food? Are they able to make plans with a friend? Are they able to understand a phone number and write it down from a voicemail? Things like that in the language, these are associated with different levels, and a lot of times it requires more than one skill as well if they have to do something like listening and writing it down. But in general, these are skills that should be improving in terms of their proficiency through the years of their language study. And if it's not, it could be that we're just trying to cover the material that's in the book because it's next and get ready for a test, and they're not really getting there in terms of the proficiency. So if we think about control, we could think of conceptual control, meaning you've explained it in class, they know what it is, they are maybe able to look for it in the language that they are exposed to, but they are not necessarily able to use it productively. But that's the first step, is just being aware of it. Now, you don't always have to explain it first. You don't necessarily have to go for that conceptual control first, because they might be exposed to it in reading or listening and they might not even notice that it's a grammar thing that they're learning, and they might start using it. They might actually have partial control of it without necessarily having the concept, but usually they would have the concept and they would start asking, like, why is it this and not this, right? That would be conceptual control, as they're aware of it, but it's not really helping their language learning to be able to use it as a cue. But then partial control is they're starting to use it, maybe not correctly, but they're starting to use it. They're starting to hear it. They're starting to think about it. They're starting to produce it, even if it's not accurately. At least they are starting to use it. And then full control is they're able to really use it for meaning, which may start appearing at the partial control level, but definitely by the full control level, they're able to use it to produce meaning or to interpret meaning. Now, it doesn't mean that they're going to be 100% accurate at low levels. Even with full control of a grammar point, they might still be making errors in their production, but they're able to use it to distinguish meaning and to create meaning. And if you think about levels of control, when you look at a grammar point that's in your chapter, you might say, do I expect them to have full control of this? Do they need it for the assessment that I'm giving them? Or is it okay for them to have conceptual or partial control at this point? Are they able to produce their language in accordance with their correct level of proficiency for where I expect them to be in their state standards right now for my course without having that full control? And the answer might absolutely be yes. But on the other hand, if you're always settling for conceptual control because that's how you're testing is a discrete point grammar test, then it might not help them actually gain enough control of those features to be able to raise their level of proficiency over time. So it's definitely important to go through your chapter and decide, is it okay for them to stop at conceptual control of this? And then maybe we can put that aside, come back to it later, and start using it more productively later on. Leave that in the conceptual control box for now, and maybe focus on something else for full control so that we can really start using it productively and they're able to really make a difference in their language, either understanding it or speaking it using that point.